Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. There are seats down front as usual, so don't be shy. Come on down. And if you haven't found it and you still have your jacket in your hand or in your lap, there is a closet here and in the back so you can hang your coat, give yourself a little bit more space. But welcome to the Center for Total Health. My name is Keith Montgomery. I am the Executive Director here at the Center. I recognize some faces in the room, but for those that are new or haven't been here before, the Center is Kaiser Permanente's social innovation space. This is where we bring groups together to talk about all sorts of topics, including transportation, active forms of transportation, community design. Lots of different topics happen here. Some days it's prevention and wellness, some days it's end-of-life care. So that keeps things exciting here in this space. If you haven't had a chance to look around, check out our exhibits. They're interactive. There are 3 members of staff here today that can help answer your questions about the exhibits. Mo here is our operations guy. He can tell you all about the exhibits and how they run. You have Wayne by Washington, D.C. along the wall. That's an interactive wall if you want to explore that during the day. But we're all available to answer your questions on the use of this space and the types of activities that happen here. We're excited to have this group back with us. I'm also excited to see people using alternative forms of transportation. I saw some bike helmets come into the room and such. We lobbied hard to get the bike rack out in front of our building, so it's one of the most popular shared bike racks in Washington, D.C. So we're very excited that people are seeking other forms of transportation and getting here safely. Regarding safety here in our space, we have multiple forms of exit. The one that most of you came in, the front door, that is our primary way of exiting, but also through this room, out the back, there's another door. If you haven't found the restrooms, you can go either way around this, what we call our big box car here in the middle. And restrooms are down a green hallway. So there's another exit. When you go out the door, you make a right and you go out through our garage. And as another form of safety here, we also have the attendee list so we know who to count for should we have to evacuate for any reason. So thank you for visiting. If you have any questions, please let us know. Also, you should be able to hop on our Wi-Fi if you need to check the email throughout the day. Just open up a new browser. You'll see our webpage, accept the terms. And that's pretty much it. So we're glad that you're here to join us today, and I'm going to turn it over to Debbie.
Keith, thank you so much. Thank you for allowing us to continue to use this space and for your vision of total health and wellness. And so our goal is to keep people from having to come in to see you all for acute needs. You know, yesterday this issue was really brought back close to home for us. One of our staff members was hit by a car in a crosswalk yesterday afternoon. Fortunately, he was not hurt in a serious way. He did go to the emergency room, but I think when we talk about this issue of Road to Zero, it's about keeping people safe, whatever way they're using our roads and our transportation systems, and to recognize how risky it can be, something that we take for granted every day. So thank you. And everybody be safe out there too. Thanks, Keith. So every time we meet, I know we have the opportunity to share new information. We have the opportunity to learn from each other, and I certainly learn. We've got a couple of panels this morning that are absolutely fantastic, and we've got a great kickoff speaker. I want to start by saying we celebrated our 1-year anniversary at the last meeting, and I want to recognize several individuals who have been with us since the beginning, and they've reached some milestones in their career, retirement or moving on. Adrian Lund from IIHS, Jackie from Advocates, and Debbie Weir from MAD. And so I want to thank all of them for their service. I know there's going to be a couple of celebrations for Adrian and Jackie and their retirement, and we absolutely wish them well. We thank them for all the time they've contributed to the Road to Zero steering group. So today we are here to talk about our Moonshot Goal. When we kicked this initiative off, We talked about the challenges that we knew were facing us, very similar to the challenges that were facing people back in the 1960s when they said they wanted to go to the moon before the decade was out. They had to figure out survival mechanisms for people in space, communication systems, hardware, software, to get people to the moon and then bring them safely home. So we don't need to figure out how to survive outside of Earth's atmosphere, but we need to figure out how to get the millions of people who are using our transportation system home safely too. So this is a huge challenge. We know it is, but that's why we've called it our Moonshot Goal, and we're really thinking about how to get to zero by 2050. So let's talk about how Road to Zero is working, the things that we're focused on. Certainly the listening sessions, the conversations that we've had, the quarterly meetings, the input that we receive from each of you as we get together, those have all helped us focus on creating a roadmap of how we want to look at getting to zero by 2050. So we focused on the future that we want to see by 2050, and we're working backwards. But so when we talk about some of those things, we know we want to make the infrastructure safer. We know we want to make cars even safer. We know we want to change laws, and we want to maybe look at behaviors. But at the end of the day, one of the most important things that this group of people with a like goal can do is really change the culture of what it means to accept 40,000 fatalities every year and the complacency that goes along with that. We have to create a culture change so that each one of those fatalities is seen as preventable and tragic. So we're moved to action. There have been a lot of books that have been written about culture change, but when we talk about it, we have all of the ingredients for success. We have a clear and compelling vision. We have a coalition of the willing to share the work, and we're going to need courage and leadership. And that's where some of the leaders, some of our speakers today are going to come in, and certainly people who we're working with. We have a group that actually isn't with us here this morning. They stopped by, and I think they had to leave because they're working to introduce a bill with Senators Gillibrand and Cruz on truck underrides today. So there's a lot of people working in a lot of different spaces as we try to think about how we get to zero, and we're excited to engage with all of them. So how are we going to get to zero? We want to make sure that with our RAND work, and these are the listening sessions over the last year that we've been working with the RAND Corporation to develop a roadmap, how do we make that goal of zero a reality? So we need to do three things. We need to double down on what works. We need to accelerate technology, and we need to look at safety as a system and talk about that culture change. So as an example of doubling down on what works, one of the first policy positions that was approved a couple of months ago was on occupant protection. We're working on a number of others. These are opportunities for coalition members, and we're at over 450 coalition members now, to focus on something together and really advance that. To double down on what works, we must address the areas where we're seeing increases in deaths and the underlying issues. And so pedestrian fatalities is one of those areas that's increasing. I just had a conversation with some gentlemen who are here from the armed forces. And one of the things that they focus on is how to keep people safe when it comes to traffic fatalities. They had 2 pedestrian fatalities yesterday, one in Afghanistan and one in Korea. We work really hard to keep our warfighters safe, and they're doing very risky things. We don't want to lose them in roadway fatalities. So how do we look at things like speeding and understand what we can do to make a difference? Long-standing issues, the persistent killers on our roadways, 10,000 fatalities every year, alcohol-involved deaths. We've got to be able to address these issues and double down on what works. There are things that we know work. So the next thing that we're looking at with the report is accelerating technology. One of the game changers, and I think one of the ways that many people are seeing that we can potentially get to zero in our lifetime, is the advent of advanced technology. Carnegie Mellon did a study, and they estimated just 3 technologies, forward collision warning, lane departure warning, and blind spot monitor, could save 10,000 lives if those 3 technologies were implemented fleet-wide. Over 1 million crashes. So what's keeping us from implementing technologies like this that are commercially available in vehicles today? We know that there's been great progress made with voluntary agreements for some, but not all, of the technologies that are out there. Can we do more? Can we do more in more spaces? And when we talk about accelerating technology and the adoption of technology into the fleet, we have to recognize that that penetration does take a long time. Electronic stability control, this is something that is a mandate, but we know because the average age of cars is 11 years old, it does take time to get that penetration. And so we've got to start now on some of these technologies that we know can save lives. And of course, a lot of focus on autonomous vehicles. We know that this can be a huge game changer when we look at behavioral issues and the errors that human beings commit, whether they're errors of omission or commission. Certainly, technology has the potential to help all of us. But it also is going to come with some offsets. And so we have to think, as we implement those technologies, what are going to be some of the unintended consequences? What are going to be some of the things that we need to address as those roll out? So finally, the last piece is we think about that culture change and the safe systems approach. We all really have to shift our thinking on behaviors and choices, on acceptance of technology. As we look at those roadway fatalities that happen more than 100 a day, it means we can't keep doing things the same way we're doing now. We have to shift, and we have to shift fast if we're going to make an impact. So as we look at the way that we can shift behavior, not just one person at a time, but entire communities at a time, one of the ways that we can certainly look at doing that is through infrastructure. According to studies by IAHS and FHWA, installing roundabouts rather than traditional intersections can reduce injury crashes by 75% and reduce fatalities by 90%. Obviously, eliminating the possibility of those head-on or T-bone crashes, but there's also some benefits when it comes to things like traffic flow. Just mentioned some of the concern about pedestrian fatalities, and that's because year over year we've seen about a 10% increase in pedestrian fatalities, one of the fastest growing areas, and we want to pay attention to that. Certainly Vision Zero cities have been looking at speed as a huge factor for vulnerable road users. But when we start to break it down and understand the science and the data behind it, it is pretty simple and it's straightforward. Increasing speeds result in worse outcomes. Decreasing speeds in urban environments when there's vulnerable road users present will have better outcomes. So we want to think about all of these things. Certainly complex, not monolithic. There won't be a silver bullet, but we can look at engineering and design as a solution. We can look at behavior change. We know we've certainly seen it. But what we know is that the people in this room are the giants of this industry. When we look at making change, this is how it begins, with a group, and maybe small, and we have 200 people who are on the webcast, so we're bigger than, maybe bigger than we think we are. It may be small to tackle this huge problem, but that's the only way anything has ever gotten solved. It starts with a small group of committed people who are willing to do things differently and change things. One of our very dedicated partners in this effort is the Federal Highway Administration, and we're so excited to have the Federal Highway Administration's acting administrator, the deputy administrator, Brandy Hendrickson join us today. So some of you may know Brandy. You may have worked with Brandy. In July, she was named Deputy Administrator to lead the daily operations of a 2,900-person federal agency. They span 6 time zones, and she directs execution of all of their primary programs. She previously served as Indiana's DOT Commissioner, and since we're still awaiting the FHWA Administrator, she is working 2 jobs for us right now. So Brandy, thank you so much for the time, the energy, and the dedication and the commitment to safety that you've made through the course of your career and at your leadership at FHWA. We're so happy to have you here with us this morning, and I'd love to turn it over to you to set the stage for how safety plays a role. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Debbie, for that nice introduction. Thanks to all of you so much for being here. I know that it's, you come from far and wide, and it's a commitment to travel here and to spend time here in the capital city. But thank you so much for your commitment to safety and to the time and passion that you put into this. I'm not the only federal highway employee that's doing 2 jobs, so I'd like to, recognize those other federal highway employees that are here, and thanks for showing up and for your commitment as well. So thanks so much for your commitment to the Road to Zero Coalition. Certainly thanks to Debbie for her leadership and to the National Safety Council showing your passion and commitment for this important thing. Secretary Chow has, put a stake in the ground and identified safety as her #1 strategic goal. As I looked at the agenda today, though, I was really excited to see all the discussion around innovation and disruptive technologies, and know that that's also one of the strategic goals of the department, in innovation. And so I'm glad to hear that this group is spending a lot of their time today talking about that. All of the Federal Highway are committed to working with our colleagues also in the different modes. So thank you to NHTSA and FMCSA for their life-saving work and their participation in this group as well. And though we share different missions, we also share a common goal: 0 fatalities on U.S. roads. The increase in roadway fatalities over the last 2 years is a concern that we also share, and we're all working across U.S. DOT to bring that number down. We and our counterparts are working to advance safety through innovative next-generation technologies like intelligent transportation systems that will help to make self-driving vehicles a reality. We are working very closely with our counterparts in other modes to come out with the AV Guidance 3.0 document that will bring in all modes of transportation in advancing automated vehicles across the industry. And so we're really working hard to be able to roll that out in 2018. Such technologies show great promise, as you know, in the effort to make thousands of roadway fatalities each year obsolete. But like any new disruptive technology, the evolution of automation into our culture and into our transportation system really takes time and resources and acceptance by the public. And in the meantime, though, we're not just kind of sitting on our hands and waiting. We continue to promote the infusion of safety into the design, the building, the operation, and the maintenance of the U.S. road system, and ensuring that every highway project is safety focused. We have made really great progress in implementing the performance management framework required by MAP 21. Simply put, this really shines a light on the states that are investing resources in projects that will achieve statewide safety targets and make sweeping progress towards our national safety goals. We're also working with our partners and stakeholders to advance the use of state strategic highway safety plans. And as Federal Highway has done for many years, we will continue providing technical assistance in research, design, and implementation of roadway safety improvements. Nearly 10 years ago, Federal Highway began promoting certain infrastructure-oriented safety treatments and strategies, which are now known as proven safety countermeasures. They were selected based on their effectiveness and their ability to reduce fatalities and serious injuries on the roads. And for many of you who I've had the opportunity to work with recently and in the long term, you all know that I don't hesitate to pick favorites. I come from Hamilton County, Indiana, where we have over 200 roundabouts, and that's a statistic that we are very proud of, and we recognize there the impact to safety that those have. So besides roundabouts, there are 19 other ones, and this information about those different treatments and those initiatives can be found on our website. I like to carry around a copy of all 20 of them here in my handy-dandy little folder. And since the beginning of the Proven Safety Countermeasures Initiative, we have been able to roll these out and promote them that practitioners can use to mitigate crashes. And in September, we rolled out 9 new ones that included strategies like local road safety plans and leading pedestrian intervals. And you'll hear about some of these measures during the presentations today, so I hope that you get some value out of that and you're able to take them back and implement them and communicate them to your stakeholders. We want to work smarter, not harder, and when we invest federal dollars in road safety, it's important to do that. Federal Highway is analyzing data to spot trends and develop interventions that offer the best return on investment. Specifically, we are working with states to use a common set of fundamental data elements to bring uniformity to reporting. For example, beginning in early 2019, all states will use the same definition for reporting serious injuries. And standardizations like this will help improve roadway and traffic data inventories and will help ensure that we are all measuring with the same yardstick. So we know that as we collect the information, as we're able to be consistent in how we report, that we'll be able to track trends more effectively and really be able to target our investments better. Federal Highway is also focusing on 3 areas that encompass nearly 90% of U.S. traffic fatalities: roadway departures, intersection crashes, and pedestrian and bicycle crashes. Through our focused approach to safety initiative, we are targeting our technical assistance and other resources on those areas where they will do the most good. States and localities are selected to participate in this program based on safety statistics in each of the 3 emphasis areas. This approach addresses key safety challenges in 23 high-priority states and 34 local agencies, and we are seeing success, actually. We are very happy to report that participating states have experienced a greater reduction in emphasis area fatalities than in non-focused states, so it's working. So in conclusion, Federal Highway will continue to provide leadership in safety improvements in the years ahead, working hand in hand with all of you. And on behalf of the nearly 3,000 men and women of the Federal Highway Administration, I thank you sincerely for the work that you are doing. And in the years ahead, I look forward to working with you to make our highways, sidewalks, and bike paths even safer to reach our goal of 0 fatalities. And thank you again for coming, and I wish you a very Merry Christmas and happy and very safe holidays to you all.
Thank you, Acting Administrator Hendrickson. I'd like to call up Beth Alacandri, who is FHWA Associate Administrator for Safety.
Thank you so much, Brandy. Thank you so much, Debbie. I have a red scarf so that I can match the other ladies, but I left it on my chair. I went with the pink shoes instead. Good morning. What a pleasure to see you. I am really just here to introduce the director of the next panel. Mike Griffith is the Office Director for the Federal Highway Administration's Office of Safety Technologies. He refused to give us the link to his biography, saying that that was the way he wanted to be introduced, so I decided to embarrass him even more. Mike has been with the Federal Highway Administration for a very long time. He started his career in the research office, where he did really, really great work in implementing some of the systems that we are now incredibly dependent on, like the Highway Safety Information System. Mike's background, and I believe his core belief is statistics. He believes and absolutely drives things based on a numbers-driven approach, based on saying, where does the data leave us so that we can make the best decisions? He has led his team and many other teams to great success with regard to saving lives. He comes to work every day with that as his mission, and I see it in everything he does. So I am really happy to introduce Mike Griffith.
Thank you so much, Beth. I didn't expect that. That was very nice of you. I don't have, just for the record, I don't have, exactly. Just for the record, I don't have pink shoes on like Beth, but I am in the holiday spirit. I just don't have anything to demonstrate that here today. But I'm very excited to host this panel, and I'm going to build off of some remarks that Debbie and Brandy made. Debbie talked about doubling down on countermeasures that work, on innovations that work, and Brandy actually said it really well for me in terms of the proven safety countermeasures. As she mentioned, over the past 10 years, we have been promoting countermeasures that research shows are effective. And I don't have time to go through all of them, but up here on the screen, you can see what the 19 are. And we debuted the first set of countermeasures back in 2008. In 2012, we introduced the second round of countermeasures. And just about 3 months ago, we introduced the current round of countermeasures. And essentially, we're promoting these countermeasures because they have not received widespread use in the United States. And I think when the Federal Highway Administration shines a light on safety improvements that work, I think the state and local agencies do pay attention. They take a close look at what we're promoting. So I think over the past decade, with the spotlight that we put on countermeasures that are proven based on research, we have seen these countermeasures take off, and that's what we're trying to do with the current set of countermeasures. So just briefly, these are the 6 that we're promoting now. They're not all countermeasures, actually. Some of them are strategies or action plans. Hold on. There are 2 that pertain to intersections. One that deals with reduced left turn conflict intersections. How we know left turns at intersections are really challenging. There are different designs that either get rid of the left turn conflicts or significantly reduce them. We also have issues at stop-controlled intersections. We know that you can apply multiple low-cost countermeasures at these stop-controlled intersections with simple signs and paper markings. On the pedestrian side, and you may hear about this from one of our speakers, there's the leading pedestrian interval. This is basically an improvement that gives pedestrians a head start before any vehicles enter into the intersection. Gives them a green indication, gets them out there, and gets them safely across before vehicles start making their movements. We have the cross-cutting ones. Also, we have local road safety plans. As you know, we've had a lot of success with state strategic highway safety plans. We are now seeing a number of local agencies develop their own plans that are modeled off the state strategic highway safety plans. This is really important because we know a lot of our safety problems happen at the local level, and having solid and robust plans helps drive the safety programs in these jurisdictions. Debbie had a slide up about the problem with speeding. We know that there's a lot of challenges in getting the right speed limit posted. That's number one. That's fundamental. When you deal with speed, you've got to get the speed limit right. And we have an expert system called US Limits 2 that takes into account a lot of different factors for how you should set speed limit and set one that's really based on the best science. And then finally, and you'll hear about this in one of our presentations, roadway departure. It's one of, unfortunately, our biggest killers of people dying on the highways is when they leave the road. You can do a lot at curves, and I think Adam Weiser is going to talk about some of the improvements that you make at horizontal curves to make those isolated segments of the road safer. And you can go to our website and learn a lot more about these countermeasures. Whoops. How do I bring up title slide for David Yang? As you're doing that, I will introduce David. David recently became the executive director this year, right? I have it right, this year? Last year. Oh, time flies, David. He's executive director for the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety. I had the opportunity to work with David prior to that. He worked for the Federal Highway Administration for 8 years. He was head of our Human Factors Laboratory. And prior to that, he worked 4 years at Volpe. And we're going to start with David's presentation because he's going to give you a national perspective of what can be achieved in infrastructure investments. They've done a really excellent report that was released about a year ago. And so I'm going to tee it up with David, and then we're going to move down to Adam, who's going to talk from the state perspective, and then Dan's going to talk from the local perspective. So David, please come up.
Good morning. Thank you, Mike, for the introduction. Good morning. So I have the great opportunity to kind of come in in front of this audience to share with you about one of the work we have done. Actually, the report was released in May of this year, and the title of the report is called Safety Benefit for Infrastructure Improvement. So I'm going to basically give you a little bit of background. Really, why are we doing this? About the motivation. Really, I think a lot of the time when people talk about traffic crashes or traffic fatality issue, most of the time people look into the road user, the driver. We have all heard a famous statistic about 94% of the driver, 94% of a vehicle accident can be attributed to some sort of driver error. There's also people putting a focus on vehicle as well. I think these two components, they are very important. But basically, when you look at a transportation system, you need to have a trinity where you have the vehicle that's driving, the road user that's using the vehicle, but you also have the infrastructure that's supporting it. And so this report right here is really what we're trying to do. We believe that if we can do a better job improving the infrastructure design and so forth, we'll be able to likely to reduce the probability of driver making error. And eventually that will lead to reduction in traffic-related injury and fatality. So that is really the motivation on why we want to do this report. Really, so in this report we ask this fundamental question, which is, I'm going to read it to you. What would be the impact of implementing all highway infrastructure safety improvement whose benefits are greater than their cost? And we are looking at it from the perspective of how many lives it could be saved, how many injuries that could be prevented, and really what are some of the benefits from the economic value perspective. So this report, as I mentioned, is AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety. We contracted this work out to a consulting firm called MRI Global, and they did a technical analysis for us. And then when we have the draft report, we send out to some of the leader to provide really that peer review process. So we know that the review, when the report is out, this is really a solid report. It was released in May of this year. So really, the approach is that we, MRI Global, the technical team, they took data from the U.S. Roadway Assessment Program, the U.S. RAP program, from 9 different states, basically at different places throughout the United States. And they got data from 12,000 miles of roadway that ranging from freeway, from a principal arterial major roadway to the minor roadway. Basically, the whole goal here is to identify what are some of the cost-effective infrastructure improvement, and basically looking at it from the perspective of design feature, from traffic volume, from crash rate. So you may be wondering, what are some of the examples of these infrastructure improvement considered? So a lot of time when people think about infrastructure improvement, I think many times people thought, well, it's going to be really expensive, right? You need to rebuild the road, you need to improve the, really rebuild that whole intersection. Well, I think that what in our report, what we are recommending is that there's really all range of improvement you could make on the roadway. Something as, you know, as kind of simpler stuff like widening the lane and shoulder, you know, adding a pedestrian facility, to more involved project like kind of, you know, building, adding signalization if they are warranted, as well as roundabout. Roundabout is one of the things that has been proven to be very effective in calming the traffic. So, and the analysis, basically, you know, but what we did is we look at some of the case study from the previous U.S. rep, and we found that basically, basically they were looking into the cost of implementing and maintaining these facility, how many lives that could be saved, how many injuries that could be prevented, what's the economic value. So what we did in our report is we take out those case studies, and then we project them to a kind of nationwide. If all the roadway in the United States are making these improvements, what would happen? And here are the results. Some of the findings is that what we found based on the work by MRI Global is that in a 20-year span, we believe that if we implement cost-effective infrastructure safety improvement, we could have the potential to save about 63,000 lives. And we could prevent about close to 354 injury. And when you look at the benefit cost, about putting the cost of improving them versus the benefit, you actually have a very favorable ratio of 2.4. So to us, you know, that is really, it's a great way for us to kind of contribute by making improvement in the infrastructure. This bar chart here kind of shows you a little bit of kind of plot. If you are making the intersection-related improvement, you can probably have, basically can contribute to about 30% a reduction in fatality and death, and so forth and so forth. And really, in conclusion, in my presentation, I just want to really provide that national perspective, is we believe that if we are making infrastructure improvement, proper improvement, has a potential to prevent up to about over 40,000 deaths and injury. And really what we found based on our calculation is the economic value outweigh the cost. And again, before I close, I would just want to point out is our finding, these numbers that's presented to you, we believe we are underestimating them because we did not take into the account of all the growth in the vehicle mile travel in the future. We only consider the economic value, but there's also other benefit. So if you have interest to learn more about this report, it's available on our website. Well, I also brought several copies, about 20 copies of the fact sheet. It's kind of one-pager, tell you about some of the kind of high-level finding and so forth. So I'm going to share that and put in at the registration desk. So if you want to pick a copy, you're more than welcome to. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Mike.
So David, you went so fast. You were very good. So I'm going to ask you a question, and then we're going to open it up really quick. You mentioned you use US RAP, and I know that there's probably only about 5 people in the room that know what US RAP is. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to explain what that is, because I think it's an excellent tool that only a few states are using. So if you could just explain what US RAP is, because that was kind of the methodology that you used for this study.
Sure. So right now, the U.S. Roadway Assessment, U.S. Roadway Assessment Program is hosted by the Roadway Safety Foundation. This is a program basically started out with AAA Foundation, I believe in the early 2000s, in the mid-2000s range, basically kind of going through the United States roadway and making assessment on grading the roadway system and so forth. And I don't remember all the history, as Mike mentioned to you. I only became the executive director for AAA Foundation at the end of last year. But I believe about 5 years or so ago, the program was basically transformed to the Roadway Safety Foundation for them to continue this great program. Again, if you want to know more information about it, it's going to be, if you go on to just type in, Google it, or you can go to the Roadway Safety Foundation. I believe there's certain information leading to that. So I don't know if that's high level enough or too high level, but that's all I can muster right now. So.
I would just add that I was involved with working with AAA Foundation when Peter Kissinger was there in terms of really starting to make the U.S. aware of this tool, because it originally came from other countries. There's actually an international road assessment tool, and so U.S. RAP was built off of this international tool, and we're just kind of at the early stages now in the U.S. in terms of learning about it and starting to implement it. Do we have other questions for David? Yes.
I have a question.
Sure, if you can come to the mic, that would be great.
Hi, David. I can talk loud. Just one question on the states you had up there. Mm-hmm. The states that did the evaluation. I didn't notice any East Coast states. There's no New Jersey, New York, Connecticut. It seems to be all the Midwest. Is that a big variable?
There's actually, I believe, one of the nice states is we have Washington State. So basically what the consulting firm did is they did a sample of the state, and you're absolutely right. We did not do Massachusetts. We did not have those states. I don't recall exactly what was the reason for it, and that's something we could look into in the future. So yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, David. Appreciate it. As I mentioned, we're gonna go from the national level down to the state level, and we're very fortunate to have Adam Weiser here from Delaware Department of Transportation. He took a train down from Delaware today. I think he was up much earlier than most of us in the room, but he looks like he's full of energy and ready to go. So Adam is responsible for the implementation and management of Delaware DOT safety programs, which includes the Federal Highway Administration Highway Safety Improvement Program that's managed in this state. The best part about his bio is his family. He has 2 children, Madison and Nathan, Madison 9 and Nathan 2. And also I am happy to report that last month, Adam was here in Washington, D.C., accepting a Roadway Safety Award for the great work that Delaware is doing with high-friction surface treatments. And for those of you who have never seen what high-friction surface treatment looks like, I have a little sample here in a box. So for all you geeky engineers out there who've never seen this is kind of cool to check out. Thank you. So Adam, come on up.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mike, for the introduction. So I have a 2-year-old, so energy is not an option, or not having energy is not an option for me. So, yeah, I was up early this morning. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about some effective systemic curve improvements. We have roadway departure crash problem in our state, as many states do. So one of the things we looked at is the different strategies that we have for addressing roadway departure crashes. And there's 2 strategies, 2 main strategies: keeping vehicles on the road and minimizing the consequences of leaving the roadway. And really what we want to do is keep vehicles on the roadway. We don't want them to leave the roadway at all. So looking at our data, we found 2 programs that we could implement relatively quickly, relatively inexpensively, and that's our high friction surface treatment and horizontal curve signage program. When you look at our data for roadway departure crashes, overall represents about 46% of our serious injury and fatalities across the state. Delaware is a little unique where we maintain about 89% of our road system, so we're the state and the local government as well when it comes to the majority of our roadways. 49% of our roadway departures have occurred within a horizontal curve. Okay, so that's a red flag right there. We need to really look hard at our horizontal curves. 22% occurred during adverse weather conditions, whether we have wet pavement, snowy, or icy pavement. Again, a red flag for us. We want to try to address that, and these treatments can help address that relatively quickly. Oops. So we developed a systemic program a few years ago. You know, the buzzword of systemic was kind of around, and we looked at it, and we looked at how we were running our safety programs overall, and we felt that going to a systemic approach would give us a better bang for our buck. Trying to chase crashes is really not the best solution, especially when it comes to roadway departure crashes. You have to get out in front of this problem, try to prevent these from occurring as much as possible. So when we looked at the data, we decided to focus on the curves, and we decided to focus on the adverse weather conditions. So we developed our high friction surface treatment program. And we'll talk a little bit about how we prioritize the roadways and what we're doing with high friction surface treatment. We also looked at horizontal curve improvements, and this went in along the lines of looking at the manual and uniform traffic control devices as well, trying to address the 2019 compliance date for horizontal curve warning signage. So we are kind of killing two birds with one stone here with our curve signing program. We have two other systemic programs that we utilize in Delaware: longitudinal rumble strips and freeway median barrier. Those two programs are also in progress, but I'm going to focus on the curve programs today. Let's talk about high friction surface treatment. Some of you will recognize that photo there. So high friction surface treatment, you have the sample going around. It's a skid resistant surface treatment. It's a pavement overlay. It's a very thin pavement overlay. It uses an epoxy coating. And then over top of that epoxy, we spread a special type of aggregate. And that aggregate is designed to withhold friction. It's designed to maintain friction longer than our standard pavements. But it's expensive. It can be expensive, so we don't use it everywhere. We use it on horizontal curves where we see the most friction demand, where people are driving a little too fast as they get into a curve. The high friction surface treatment helps grip the tires to the pavement better and keeps the vehicles on the roadway. We use it where we see vehicles braking excessively. It can be used on approaches to a stop-controlled intersection, where you see people braking more excessively than in normal tangent section roadways. We've used it on interchange ramps. It can be used on bridges as well. Again, where you need more skid resistance. So through our systemic process, we looked first at our roadway departure crashes that were occurring on our roadways. We looked at the horizontal curves, and we focused on rural collectors and local roadways. Based on our data, on our fatal and serious injury data, that's where the majority of these crashes were occurring. So that's where we wanted to get out ahead and try to minimize these types of crashes on these types of roadways. When we looked at our data and we ranked the locations based on crashes and based on the other contributing factors, the types of roadways, we looked at also roadways that were not in any other program, that weren't going to get a surface treatment through our pavement rehab program or through microsurfacing, or there was no other project that was going to come in within the next year and destroy our improvement. So we excluded a lot of those roadways. But we really looked at the wet weather crashes, we looked at the crash rates, and we looked at the type of roadway that these crashes were occurring on to develop our location selection process. The materials, as I said, it's a polyresin binder material. It's a very thin overlay material with a high quality aggregate. The aggregate's designed to resist polishing and hold the skid resistance longer than standard paving. We use mainly, it can be applied a couple different ways. We do an automatic application process, a truck application process. Costs range from between $25 to $50 per square yard. I think we're paying $32 per square yard on our current contract right now, and it has about a 10-year life cycle. We did a before and after study, so I think one of the things we want to see is how well is this product working? Is it reducing crashes? And what we found at the first 23 locations that we installed the high friction surface treatment was that we were definitely reducing wet weather crashes. We saw, at 91% of the locations, we saw a 55% decrease in wet weather crashes. We saw a total reduction in roadway departure crashes by 56%. So we definitely think that this is working very well. And you can see the chart here. You can see some of the before and after data. We've definitely brought some crashes down at a lot of these locations. We did do, besides the rural collector and local roadways, we did do one interchange ramp where we had a high rate of wet weather crashes, and it brought the treatment really reduced the number of crashes on that ramp probably by about 80%. So our horizontal curve signing program, another method of keeping vehicles on the roadway, providing them good information and good guidance for navigating through a curve. The project scope here was started out by mainly addressing the MUTCD compliance state for arterial and collector roadways that have an ADT greater than 1,000 vehicles per day. Statewide, that equates to about 3,400 locations. Our goal is to have this project completed by December of 2019. We are pretty much on target at this point. We're doing a major study on all of these curves. We're going through and doing an existing sign inventory. We're addressing some of the fundamental data element requirements for FHWA through a data collection process. So we're collecting roadway inventory information that we've never had in our system before. That's going to help us make better decisions down the road. We're running ball bank studies or safe curve speed studies on every curve to make sure that we're signing these curves appropriately. The recommendations that we're including are curve warning sign and advisory speed signs, proper placement of curve warning signs, making sure they're close enough or far enough away from the curve to give drivers enough time to react, reducing the driving task, trying to address sign clutter. We have a lot of signs on our roadways. We maintain about over 300,000 signs in Delaware. We want to reduce the amount of signs that we have and focus on the signs that we absolutely need to address driver behavior. So from initial review of that we started in Kent County, which is our central county, 62 out of 279 curves in Kent County had an advisory speed that was posted under existing conditions. And what we found was that the advisory speed, we're not giving good information to drivers. So in 48 of those cases, we didn't need an advisory speed at all. It's too much information for the driver to process. It's presenting drivers with false information that they may ignore in other situations where it's absolutely needed. In some cases, 6 of the advisory speeds were too high, and 8 were consistent with study results. 44 out of the 279 crashes actually warranted a posted advisory speed, but 20 of those locations did not have an advisory speed at all. So we weren't giving enough information to the drivers in those situations. So this is an easy safety improvement to give drivers a better understanding of what to expect ahead. We used the Highway Safety Manual to do a benefit cost analysis on that current phase, and we found that we had a cost to benefit ratio of 1 to 1,000 over a 5-year period based on just installing signs and some minor pavement marking improvements. So we're going to follow up with a before and after study crash, looking at all of our crashes on our curves to see if we were really realizing that benefit. But overall, we believe that this is a beneficial program. Okay, and with that, thank you very much, and I'll take any questions that you may have.
Thank you for that presentation. It is really encouraging to see somebody doing such a deep dive analysis into their roads, identifying a common problem and working to really address it. I'm from the National Complete Streets Coalition, and every 2 years we put out a report called Dangerous by Design that looks specifically at pedestrian fatalities, and it ranks the most dangerous states. Looks like you know where I'm going with this.
I know exactly where you're going with this. You saw Delaware, like, all right, let's talk.
Well, 9 of the top 10 states fall in the southeast, in the post-World War II built-out areas, but Delaware does stand out. It is the is the 8th most dangerous state for pedestrians, according to our most recent report. So I was curious if you've done any sort of similar analyses or initiatives to address that common problem on your roadways.
So when Mike and I talked a little bit about what I was going to present today, I did mention pedestrians. Mike said we do have somebody that's going to talk about pedestrians today. But in Delaware, pedestrians is a huge issue for us. It represents over 25% of our serious injury and fatality crashes. We have a huge focus on pedestrians. And the issue that we have, and I think is similar to in a lot of other states, in our urban areas, we have divided highways that are commercially oriented, that were not designed for pedestrians 40 years ago, that now are seeing a lot of pedestrians via transit usage, low-income families, just people just trying to find an alternate mode of transportation. And they're crossing streets. It's a human factors issue as well, where they want to cross where they want to cross, and they don't want to go up 100 feet or 1,000 feet to a traffic signal and wait for a pedestrian signal to cross the street. That's the issue that we're having. It's mostly mid-block crossings. We are addressing that through a 4Es approach. We're looking at, from the engineering side, we're looking at adding additional signalized intersections. We're using the rapid flash beacons. We're using pedestrian hybrid beacons. We're adding signalized mid-block crosswalks where we never thought we would add crosswalks ever before. We're looking now at at median barriers, some type of median fencing to keep pedestrians out of the median and keep them from crossing at unsafe locations. Education-wise, we're out with message boards. Police are out doing enforcement and education initiatives trying to educate pedestrians on where the safe places are to cross. We're revising bus stop policies, looking at, we got a whole lot going on. But yeah, really good question. And it's one of the hard, I think from my standpoint, I could sit up here and say high friction surface treatment, horizontal curve signs, rumble strips, all day long to address roadway departure crashes. There's not a silver bullet for addressing a pedestrian crash, unfortunately. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Adam. All right, Dan, you might get some tough questions on the pedestrian side. You better be ready. So, Dan Neighbors is local. He's from Arlington County. He's the design team supervisor for the Arlington County Department of Environmental Services, Transportation Engineering Operations. And I've known Dan for a number of years. He worked out at Federal Highway Administration's Research Center, Turner Fairbank Highway Research Center, for a couple years. And I lost track of Dan. He ended up going to VHB, and then also I discovered that he started working for Arlington County, and I said, boy, I got to get him on a panel. So here he is, and he's going to talk about some of the great stuff that they're doing in Arlington County, specifically dealing with pedestrians and bicyclists. Dan.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Mike, for the introduction. Just a little bit of context I'm going to start with for Arlington County. It is very close if you're here, if you're from this area. It's 26 square miles of that original 100 square mile land that was allotted when DC was made. But it's just right across the Potomac. But I'm not going to get too much into the numbers, but I will say what is really important and what I'm showing you right here is that we have a lot of pedestrian and bicycle traffic. As a matter of fact, in our urban areas, in our urban sections, we have most of the traffic, more than 50% of the people that are getting around are doing so by walking, biking, or taking transit. So that's more than people that are driving. So it's really important to us. And because of that, we have to have a very aggressive program to implement pedestrian and bicycle measures. And that's what I'm going to show you. How do we do that? You can see on this slide right here, basically these are like the 4 different ways that we implement pedestrian and bicycle projects. We have long-range projects, which take more time and more consultation with the public. We also have safety studies where we do corridor studies or hotspot studies based off of what we're seeing in our crashes. We also have a pretty robust community engagement where some projects come out of that as well. And then finally, that last item on the bottom is we do a lot through maintenance too. And that's where we see a lot of opportunity to implement things quickly is through our maintenance, our repaving program. And just a little context on what we're talking about in terms of how much what facilities we have to address is basically we have 2,800 intersections where people are crossing. that we have to address safety at those locations. And I'll just skip down. We have 8 of our crossings are pedestrian hybrid beacons, where we see that as an effective measure. And then in terms of bicycle lanes, we have over 75 miles of on-street bicycle lanes. So the one thing I'll show here again is when we're talking about quick and really fast and rapid deployment, we're using our pavement marking program. And so whenever we do a remarking of a street, we're reviewing the crash data and reviewing the traffic data. That's the first thing we do, to look at the opportunities and how do we improve things through that process. So some of the things that we know when we're talking about pedestrian and bicycle improvements, specific to crosswalks, we know that high visibility markings is one way to improve pedestrians crossing, also improving the signage, and then curb extensions or any type of thing that really affects the length of that crossing, medians included, and that's one of the proven safety countermeasures. So on a very, very basic level, we start with what's in the MUTCD, and here you can just see a crossing where we're using the high visibility markings. That's pretty much standard practice for us. We take that, and then we look at what additional signage we would install based off of conflicts and other data that we collect. And again, we're just really trying to maximize that communication between motorists and vehicles so that we end up with the safest crossings possible. But we're using the MUTCD as that baseline. So we always look at what is an MUTCD, and we go beyond that very often. Here you can see an RFB, rectangular rapid flashing beacon, that is. And you can see is on the approach for the vehicles to that crossing there, not only we're using, the yield lines, which is in the MUTCD, but we're using a long, about 50 or 75 foot solid line to indicate no passing and to warn motorists that the rectangular rapid flashing beacon crossing is ahead. We're also using our marking program to kind of reconfigure our streets and look for opportunities where we can narrow lanes and install more robust facilities for bicyclists, such as buffered bike lanes. And so that's something that we see regularly, that we are turning over our bicycle lanes that we did 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and making them into buffered bike lanes. And of course, this goes along with improvements to crossings, such as using high visibility crosswalk markings. And this is just another image of a different way that we've employed buffered bike lanes. Going one step beyond that is we're also looking at implementing protected bike lanes. And this provides better separation for bicyclists from the travel lane by pushing the bicyclists against the curb, and they're separated by a vehicle parking lane. And this is something that we've seen pretty aggressive implementation too. We're converting a lot of lanes into protected bike lanes as well. The one thing that we are still going through and testing is, how do we maintain those? Winter months is really where we see more of the issues, but we do have specialized equipment that fits down those lanes, and if we do it to our standard, if we can develop to our standard, then it's seemingly easier at least. So having that specialized equipment is really, really important in communicating that to make sure that that's part of the routine maintenance is a critical piece. Other things too, again, we have really intersections that were built like 30, 40 years ago with 5 legs and maybe 20-foot wide lanes, and we're just taking that space, and people figure out, if we kind of set off that space so that it's not used for through vehicles like you can see in this photo here. We just kind of striped out a lane that was basically over 20 feet wide. People realize that they could use it for other things. And so we're going through and looking at how to do that in the short term, with the long-term improvement being making that solid curb improvements. So the other thing too is I talked about improving signage. Here's just something that we did to improve signage at our pedestrian hybrid beacons, our hawk signals, and you can see the message there is something that we employed to just communicate better to motorists what actions they should take. So curb extensions are the other piece that I said that we employ to help reduce that pedestrian exposure. And ideally, we do this in conjunction with our paving program. So we'll make the curb extension changes, and then we'll repave the street so it's a nice, neat project. But we don't always wait for that because, again, we have to be very aggressive in what we're doing. And sometimes we'll do kind of temporary measures just to mark them out with pavement markings and bollards, or delineators. The nomenclature in Arlington is bollards, not actually bollards. And we'll do that in anticipation of eventually getting those as a permanent, more hardscape changes. And the same goes with our medians too. This is a street where we had an opportunity to repave it, and we saw it was really wide, and so we put in a median, put in an RFB, and repaved it, and it looks very, very different. So, we're combining a lot of those proven safety measures in a lot of our projects. Again, some of the things we're really trying to be aggressive about is being opportunistic and looking in how we can get into things like medians or curb extensions. And you can see here, this is just one of our streets where, when you have snow, you kind of see how, what's left is sometimes how you can remark things. And so we are doing a pilot program where we are putting in mid-block crossings with just the delineators and the markings. And again, anticipation of more permanent improvements. And here's some photos of how we do that temporarily. And you can see this here. And sometimes we do traffic calming measures where we're doing roadway narrowing to make them more effective in reducing traffic speeds as well. Here's just another way that we do this. This was actually an intersection with 2 left turn lanes where we saw that we didn't need the additional left turn lane, so we kind of did a little space where we marked out that left turn lane with bollards and markings. And then the next stage that we did is we put in planters, and that's going into construction in the spring. So, our pilot process for these things is usually less than a year because we don't want them to be in that state forever. But again, it's just a way to get something done more quickly with an ultimate design of being able to provide that kind of hardscape protection. One last project I'll talk about, because this is really important for us too, is road diets. And this is a road diet project that we started in 2015. And again, we looked at how to do it best and how we could do it in conjunction with our marking program. So we couldn't get the whole stretch. But what we did this past year is extended it one long block of about 600 feet so that we have a continuous road diet project again now. So again, what we see as part of what we're trying to do is we're trying to implement things as quickly as possible, keeping in mind what are those proven safety countermeasures, but how do we fill in that gap before we actually do those physical improvements? How can we get something in quickly? And we found we see some real success in doing that in conjunction with our pavement and marking program. So, all right, and you said I had to go fast, so I did.
Great. We have time for questions. Okay. Any questions for Dan? Because I have a couple for you if no one does. All right. So I know Wilson Boulevard well. I drive over in that area, and so it's really encouraging to see the road diet go in. Road diets are proven to be very effective, but sometimes there's resistance from the public. And so I'm just curious to what your outreach was that was done with the public and whether you had much resistance in putting that road diet in.
Well, yeah, that's a really good question, Mike. We go through a pretty robust and extensive process to help inform the community what the benefits of some of these countermeasures are. And it does make projects longer in terms of implementation. And so we find that, a lot of that public process takes about a year or so. And that's why we're kind of doing the interim things, because we can kind of demonstrate to the public that this is what we want to do and this is how it works. And we find that is kind of an effective tool because then it gives us an opportunity to demonstrate how things would work to the public, but also it gives us an opportunity to make some changes before we do a permanent design. One of the slides that I showed you were some of those 3D models that we do. We actually do 3D models to help describe to people better, rather than just putting a plan on the table and saying, this is what we're going to do. We do a 3D model saying, this is what it looks like, and they kind of get it, I think, a little bit better. And you kind of see people around the table when you're in a public meeting, they're like, oh yeah, I see, when you do that. So it is a lot of work on our part, I feel, but I think it's necessary because not only do we want to do these things because they are safer, but we want the people to understand how to use them as well.
It's pretty impressive what you're doing in Arlington. It's very systemic. I was telling Dan before I'd like him to come to Alexandria, where I live, and start doing some of these things. But in terms of, do you guys do any of your own research or hire consultants to do research on all these different systemic improvements, or you rely mostly on the national research to judge those decisions?
That's a good question. We do a combination of having consultants help with some of our bigger studies, and then like some of our spot locations where we're doing improvements, particularly when we're doing temporary things, we'll collect before and after data. We have various means to do that. We usually have cameras that we just put up, and we'll collect the data, and we'll also be able to make observational studies that way too. So we can not only see, what our, not only speeds and volumes and hard data like that, but we can also look at conflicts and things like that that help us improve our designs.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Bill Windsor with Nationwide. I have a question for the whole panel. Over the last 5 years, we've really seen speed limits on interstates dramatically rise, 70, 75, 80, 85 in some cases. At the same time, it seems like, at least the states I drive in, that those increases in speed limits have sort of gravitated down to the state and county roads. So whereas speed limits there have also increased 60, 65, 70 miles an hour. And we know from IHS studies that that when we raise speed limits, that drivers continue to drive 5 to 10 miles an hour over the posted speed limit. So we've seen fatalities go up over the last 5 years. So I'm curious what the panel thinks about the impact of rising speed limits has had on those increases in fatalities, and what can we do about the speed problem.
All right, we're trying to coordinate. Well, basically, that I agree. I mean, we see that trend as well, and kind of seeing that increase. Actually, several years ago, AAA Foundation has done a study and pretty much show what Ms. Hersman has shown as well, is that basically the probability of someone surviving a crash that was at a higher speed is going to be drastically reduced. And that is actually last year, some of the AAA club throughout the United States has raised those concerns too. So right now, AAA Foundation, we are taking on a in-house study we're gonna launch in 2018, kind of looking into that particular issue about the impact of increasing speed and sometimes maybe decrease speed on traffic safety. So I don't have really a concrete answer yet, but that's something we are definitely aware of, we're sensitive, and we will be investing our resources to kind of look into that issue. So.
The county perspective is a little bit different for us, just because that highest speed limit we have on our roads is 35 miles an hour. So it's different in that we still see speeding on those roads. And we're in a process now of trying to see how we kind of get those speeds down. And it's very different than when you're talking about highways. But, we're looking at measures like some of the things I showed that kind of changed the roadway. We're also looking at speed feedback signs, and we're going through an extensive data collection process on our speed feedback signs, and see just kind of modest improvements by using those. And we're doing other things like putting markings that say what the speed limit is and things like that. But it's something that we're continually trying to find new ways to address, because we do recognize that as an issue. But that is something that's ongoing, and we're trying to solve.
I think from the state perspective, I can speak for Delaware. We just recently, within the last 2 years, raised the speed limit on part of our section of I-95 from 55 to 65 miles per hour. Basically, that change was something that we instituted internally at DelDOT because we wanted the speed to be closer to what people were actually driving. We did some before and after speed data. The 85th percentile speed did not change at all just because we changed the signs. It stayed the same. People were already driving at 70, 75 miles per hour. So we made the speed limit more reasonable to match what people were driving. We did not see a major increase in crashes, definitely no increase in fatalities. I think some of the issue, though, stems nationwide from legislators just wanting to raise the speed limit for no reason. And that's I think, an issue that needs to be looked at further as to why we're doing that when the data doesn't show that we actually need to. On local road systems, I think we struggle with trying to keep speeds reasonable. I think that's part of our pedestrian problem is where we're having people cross high-speed roadways. These roads are designed for 55, 65, 60 mile an hour speeds. We're using 12-foot lane widths on these types of roads where we should really be using 11-foot or 10-foot wide lanes to try to reduce speed. So I think that piece of it goes back into the engineering on how we're designing these roads. We need to figure out what do we want the road to be, who is it going to serve, how do we want the road and the area to grow over time, and design the road in accordance with that.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Thank you. I guess this one's mostly for Dan and for Adam. My name is Patrick Wine. I'm with Rails to Trails Conservancy. I think the one thing to stress is I think that's important to mention is that probably the best way to keep pedestrians and cyclists safe from traffic is to keep them separated from traffic. And I'm wondering if you could talk about how you use your off-road trail network in Arlington or in Delaware to complement safer on-road infrastructure to promote safe passage for pedestrians and cyclists. Thanks.
So in Delaware, our trail program, our off-road bike network is growing rapidly. I don't know the statistics, but we've added several miles of trail over the last 5 years due to some governor's initiatives. We're just about completing a trail that goes from our city of Newark to the city of Wilmington. That's an all off-road facility that's going to help keep some of the bikes and the pedestrians off the roadway and provide, a dedicated use. From a data perspective, I can't say whether or not our trails are helping to reduce crashes. We just don't know that yet. We don't have a lot of good exposure data to understand how many people are actually using our trails. That's something that we're working on. So I don't know if I can really fully answer that question that you raised.
Arlington has a pretty robust trail network that is really highly used. We don't have a lot of space to increase that, however, because it's really built out. What we are focusing on is where the trails come into intersections and where that transitions to an on-street facility. So this past year, we completed a pretty major project for the Nellie Custis Trail, which comes off in the Ballston area, and it comes into a two-way cycle track that's protected on the street now. So that's like one thing. And we're trying to do similar things on some of our other trail junctions that are critical, so that we're trying to keep some sort of protected facility to go from that trail to the street network.
Great. Gentlemen, I really appreciate your presentations today and the discussion we had. So David, Adam, and Dan, thank you very much again. I think, Debbie, okay.
Mike, you were a fantastic moderator. Not only did you keep everybody on time, you helped us out with questions. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your presentations. I know there will be a lot more conversations afterwards as people want to chat with you. Our next panel is focused on futurology, and here to moderate that panel is Jane Terry. She's Senior Director for Government Affairs at the National Safety Council, and I have had the distinct pleasure of working with Jane both in and out of government when we were both at NTSB. So Jane, come on up and introduce your panelists. And I'd like to invite everyone who doesn't have a seat to come up. There's a couple of extra rows in the front that are empty. I know it's like church, nobody wants to sit in the front, but come on up and make yourself comfortable. Thanks. Jane?
Thank you, Debbie, and good morning, everybody. Gosh, as an Arlington resident who lives off Wilson Boulevard, I loved listening to that last panel discussion. But excited about this one, too. We've got a great panel here with us today. And I'll just quickly go through and introduce everybody. So we have Dr. Nadia Anderson. She's a member of Uber's policy research team located in San Francisco, where she focuses on road and traffic safety. In this role, her responsibilities include research, policy development, and highlighting how Uber is working to help address road and traffic safety-related challenges. Prior to joining the company, she was a member of AAA's National Federal Affairs team, where she helped develop the association's approach to automated vehicle technologies and frequently worked with government agencies and safety-focused coalitions on a number of initiatives. We also have Anna Bray Sharpen. She's a transportation associate in the Road Safety and Health Practice area of the WRI Ross Center for Sustainable Cities. She works with research and projects on emerging trends and best practices at the intersection of transportation, urban planning, traffic safety, and public health. Anna has worked internationally as well on roadway safety, from street design to federal policy. Chris DeTero is the operations manager for the Mid-Atlantic region at Lyft. Prior to joining Lyft, he worked in finance and equity sales at FBR in Arlington, Virginia. And prior to that, as a veteran intern at Goldman Sachs in New York. Chris served on active duty in the Navy for 5 years, from 2009 to 2014, and is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. And finally, Brooks Rainwater is a senior executive and director at the National League of Cities for City Solutions. He leads the organization's research agenda, community engagement efforts, and leadership education programming to help city leaders create strong local economies, safe and vibrant neighborhoods, world-class infrastructure, and sustainable environment. Thanks, everybody, for joining us here today, and Nadia will lead us off for today.
So good morning, everyone. So as Jane said, my name is Nadia Anderson, and I'm here today on behalf of Uber Technologies, where I'm a member of our public policy research and economics team. I joined the company a year and a half ago after working in AAA's national office, where I focused on road safety research and emerging automotive technologies, all from a policy perspective. At Uber, I'm a member of our global public policy team, where I lead our efforts on road and traffic safety. This means essentially that I get to work very closely with our local teams as they engage with cities, with governments, other stakeholders to highlight the positive role that we think that ride sharing can play. And I also have the privilege of working with our internal teams, our product, our engineering, and our other research teams, whose sole function is to innovate and explore the various ways they think that technology can help save lives. So we are absolutely thrilled to be here with you today and share our vision for the future of cities. As you can see by the slide, we have a good amount of ground to cover today. I'm going to start with a high-level overview of Uber, something that we like to call Uber 101. Then I'm going to place our presence into a larger context and speak briefly about what's happening on the world's roads. Next, I'm going to answer what very well may be the million-dollar question: what exactly is it that we're doing here, and why are we here? Why are we engaged in this space? You know, we are a tech company, so it's no surprise that we think that technology and innovation can help. So after I explain the why, I'm going to walk you through 2 areas that we're working on that we think can be really impactful. Now, I'm going to conclude my remarks with our future vision for cities and road safety, and how we intend to continue working as members of the broader road safety community in order to help us all get to zero. So we can go ahead and get started. So I want to start by saying that we are a relatively young company founded in 2009 with the goal of solving a very important problem: how to push a button and get a ride. Today, Uber is available in more than 600 cities and 77 countries. And this past May, we hit our 5 billionth ride mark. You know, around 10 million Uber trips happen a day, and on average, we have more than 65 million monthly active riders and 2 million monthly drivers. This slide shows our mission, which is relatively simple. It is to bring transportation everywhere for everyone, which makes road safety uniquely important to us, not only because of the sheer number of people who use our app to get from point A to point B, but because we also have a future vision for cities that centers upon mobility and access, where ride-sharing continues to complement public transportation, and people think differently about car ownership, and cities also think differently about how they use their space. And we know that this vision will not exist if our roads are not safe and if road deaths remain a global epidemic. So this slide kind of gives you a little bit of broad context. I know it's no surprise to anyone in this room. Each year, about 1.3 million people die due to road traffic injury due to a number of causes and contributing factors. We know that emerging economies are disproportionately impacted. However, it's important to know that economies like the US are not immune. Road safety is a public health issue and has real impacts on individuals, families, communities, and economies. And more, we see cities and countries working to find solutions. Now at Uber, we think that we have a role to play. And as a company, we take a comprehensive approach to road safety, one that aligns with the Safe Systems approach and acknowledges the role of drivers, vehicles, and infrastructure. We're happy to do our part, but we also know that an attentive driver can't compensate for a vehicle that isn't safe or for a road or bridge that isn't well maintained or wasn't designed with safety in mind. And if the goal is for all of us to get to zero or to dramatically reduce the number of people who are killed or severely injured, we know two things. The first is that we all have a lot of work to do, and that the second is that we can go further by working together. So what exactly are we trying to do and why are we here? And the answer is very simple. Our goal is to help make roads safer for everyone, and we want to do this by celebrating cities. This is something that we are committed to. We've dedicated resources toward this goal, we've launched products, and we continue to focus on ways that we think our presence and some of our learnings can help. Now I'll be the first to admit that we are not perfect within this space, and as new entrants, we have a lot to learn. But as a company, we are learning, we're making tweaks where necessary, and we're planning to continue our efforts. Now, as a tech company, as I mentioned, technology is always our North Star. And so today I'm going to talk about two things we're doing that highlight the role that we think that technology and data can play. First is our work on self-driving, and second is how we're working with cities to help fill gaps and shed light on things that can help planners and officials know what is happening on their roads. Both are areas where we think that we can lead to positive road safety outcomes and lead us closer to our future vision for cities. So, self-driving. 2 years ago, we established our Advanced Technologies Group, or called ATG, in Pittsburgh. The goal of their work was to make self-driving vehicles available to people everywhere on the Uber network, with a couple of longer-term goals in mind. One was to replace personal vehicle ownership in places and situations where it makes sense. The second was to help reduce fatalities and injuries that are caused by car crashes. The third, we also want to have a positive impact on urban air quality via carbon emissions. And the fourth is we want to be able to provide accessible and affordable transportation to all parts of the city. Now, after testing and thorough evaluation in closed settings and then on-road testing with our employees, we began operating self-driving Ubers on public roads in Pittsburgh, giving UberX riders an opportunity to experience this technology for themselves. Now, there are a number of reasons why we decided to tackle this challenge, and we were extremely thoughtful about this endeavor before diving in. The first is that we have a foundation and a network where you can integrate self-driving units into. The second, we are really motivated about this. Transportation isn't our mission, so it only makes sense that we decide to engage in this space as well. And the third is something that I'm probably a little bit biased to, is that we think we have the people in place in order to make this happen. We know this also is a space that many are interested in, and we think that we have a unique role to play, one that can benefit cities and also start to overcome what many may believe to be one of the biggest hurdles to adoption, which is consumer acceptance. Now, to highlight this role, I want to spend a few moments talking through what it takes to launch in a city and the steps that we take. So an overview of the process of launching in the city is on this slide. We start, of course, by mapping the city because we need real-world data of what the city looks like. Now, after all these steps we go through, we also bring the cars on the road for future research and development with our vehicle operators and engineers in the front seat. Passengers are only allowed to ride in self-driving Ubers after we're satisfied that the technology is ready. And even then, they are limited to the routes that we've programmed, and they only will operate along select routes during certain times. So we've taken this approach and began piloting cities because we want to continue learning and continue improving. This is something that will never stop for us. We're thinking very deeply about safety, and again, we know that the other side of this coin is consumer adoption and acceptance. We're looking for answers to the questions of what would this experience feel like for our riders? Do they like it? Do they trust it? And something that we're uniquely suited to do is that we're able to collect real-time feedback at the end of the experience, which very well may be someone's first interaction with a self-driving car or a highly automated vehicle. And then we launch in cities because we also want to expose riders to what the future of transportation may look like. And we ask some of the same questions to cities. How do cities respond? Do they have any questions? Are there design things that they should also be considering as we think about various modes of travel and what the cities may look like 10 to 20 years from now? Now, as I mentioned, in addition to self-driving, we're also interested in working in cities and finding smarter ways to move forward. From conversations that we've had with a wide variety of stakeholders, we identified a number of ways that we can use our network and our data to leverage. So we learned that there was a need for mobility data that was updated more regularly. We also learned the fact that travel across time zones is something that urban planners and operations staffs also think is valuable. So we launched what we call Uber Movement. Movement is a free and open access website, so anybody can subscribe and access the tool. You just need an Uber account to log in. All of the information is based on historical sensor data from Uber's network. The data is available for download, and you can see trends over time. User privacy is also a priority, so it's important to note that the data is aggregated and doesn't give any specific information from riders or drivers. The data has plenty of different uses depending on your interests, and as you can see, there's a lot to be learned from this open data source. Now, I'm a visual learner, so I wanted to include what the tool actually looks like in the presentation. As you can see, you can adjust the parameters and change the things like date, weather, whether it's rush hour or not, and get a sense for how things are really moving inside of a city. For us, travel times are only the beginning, and we're mapping out a future for a product that's capable of helping cities face transportation and infrastructure challenges and help make more data-driven decisions. For example, future iterations could include corridors or highlighting areas where we see patterns that may point to an infrastructure challenge, or even areas where road design could be tweaked and improved for safety and mobility. Additional versions could also leverage information from the smartphone to help identify potholes or other information about the physical condition of the road. Now, I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that there's an incredibly precise and complex technology that lies behind movement. So updates and challenges to this tool will take some time. But there are things that we're thinking about, and we plan to continue working with all of you in order to make this happen. Now, I want to close my remarks by talking a little bit about our future vision for cities and what we see as the road ahead. I want to put an asterisk next to this and say that this vision is years out, maybe even decades away, and it is, of course, rooted in the ability of people to be able to get from point A to point B safely. So this slide essentially sums up what we think about the future of cities. We think that a shared, electric, self-driving cars will bring untold benefits, and we're making huge progress on each one of these things independently. For example, in the shared space, in places where we have Uber Pool, approximately 20% of rides in cities occur via pool. We've also launched electric vehicle pilots in a number of cities and are thinking of ways that we can help encourage this transition. And of course, I just talked through our work on self-driving. But the real promise is in having all these three things happen combined. And by doing these, we'll be able to achieve a vision of reliable, affordable, and safe transportation for everyone. Now, our future vision is also built on ongoing efforts to explore the ways that we can help cities and countries make data-driven decisions. We believe that we are in a good spot to do this because we think about things the same way that many of you here do today, based on what the data says and what additional research can tell us. This may take the form of working to understand gaps in crash data, and if traditional countermeasures, the 4 E's, things that have helped us make great progress today, may need to be tweaked or updated in order to get us to zero. It could also mean using our network for good in ways of similar ways that I mentioned via movement, or possibly even doing more consumer-focused research and seeing how and if attitudes about certain technologies are shifting. Now, we consider ourselves to be one piece of a larger puzzle, and we know that we won't get to our future vision for cities or our road safety goals overnight. However, we are confident that by working together and thinking outside of the box, that we can tackle some of the biggest challenges we face today and bring our vision for the future of cities to life. And with that, I want to thank you for your time today. My email is included on the slide. I look forward to engaging with you guys offline. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or want to talk through any of the things that I mentioned in more detail. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Anna from the World Resources Institute, just waiting for my presentation to come up there. Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I'm from the World Resources Institute. It's an international research organization. We have staff in over 50 countries around the world with 6 physical offices and over 700 experts in total. And we work to improve sustainability and economic and human well-being around the world. We work in a variety of different practice areas, including energy, climate, health, and food, and also cities. And I'm part of the cities program, and particularly the road safety practice, where we work at the intersection of urban mobility and road safety. So as Nadia already mentioned, there's a dire issue with road safety in low and middle income countries around the world. Over 90% of traffic fatalities take place in these locations, even though they have less than 50% of the vehicle fleet. And these are the locations where we're concentrating our activities. This is an example of some of the cities that we work in around the world, and what our research has found is that even though there's an incredible variety in the context of these cities in terms of population, in terms of vehicles and mode share, even so, the greatest risk is for people walking, biking, and riding motorcycles, and these suffer over 90% of fatalities in most of these locations. And not only are they the most physically vulnerable users of the road, but they're generally also the most economically vulnerable people in these locations. So when we're turning our attention to how to work with low and middle income countries around the world and help them to improve road safety, we've found that the safe system approach is going to be necessary to really achieve the fast and dramatic gains that are needed to address this global problem. And our research has found that beyond the direct evidence about the particular types of intervention that are encompassed within a safe system, the countries that have implemented a safe system approach or a Vision Zero approach over the last 20 years have been the countries that have achieved the fastest reduction in fatalities to the greatest degree. So we feel very confident taking these principles and working with cities and states around the world to find a way to adapt them to the local context and need. So I'm sure you're familiar with the principles of the safe system. We're spending a lot of time working with cities to really help change the perception around road safety and shift traffic fatalities from being something that is a matter of fate or personal responsibility to something that's a public health issue and a matter that is shared between both the people using the road and the people designing the system and every element of the mobility system. And within this, we're trying to convey the message that although human error is inevitable, traffic fatalities and serious injuries don't need to be. And we're very focused on the 5th principle here, that of taking a proactive approach to really addressing the entire mobility system rather than simply reacting to individual incidents as they occur. So zooming in on the different elements of the safe system approach, we work with partners to encompass activities in all of the different areas, but our focus in the Ross Centre is very much on the intersection of sustainable mobility and road design and engineering. We know that we can design roads in a way that is safer for the sustainable mobility options of walking, cycling, and using public transport, and we know that in turn, if those options are safer and more highly used, we're going to be reducing vehicle kilometres travelled and overall exposure to risk. So you've seen a very similar version of this infographic already this morning. We're extremely focused on managing speed in order to ensure safety for those vulnerable users for the reasons that were discussed earlier. After around 20 miles per hour, 30 kilometres an hour, we see a very dramatic increase in the fatality rate for pedestrians and cyclists. This is one of the reasons why, and I think this is a very helpful graph to think about also in terms of automated vehicle technology. At higher speeds, we see that simply physics means that longer stopping times are required. Even if automated vehicles can respond in an instant and we remove the human factor of reaction time, there's still a physical need for vehicles to take space to slow down and stop. And so the lower the traffic speed, the more likely that a crash can be avoided or the severity reduced in the event of something unexpected taking place. So we work in 2 key areas with cities and states around the world to try and address this. The first area is safe design. We see this as fundamental to providing for safer speeds and safe spaces for vulnerable road users in cities, and also helping shape those behavioral outcomes that impact the road safety in a city. So just to quickly summarize those areas, we have urban design that reduces the need for vehicle travel, traffic calming to slow down speeds, especially where pedestrians and vehicles are going to be in contact. Arterial corridors that ensure safer conditions for road users, often referred to as complete streets. A network of safe and protected bicycle infrastructure, safe pedestrian facilities and access to public space, and also safe access to mass transit. And the common theme amongst these is that we're either putting vulnerable road users in situations where the speeds are not going to be fatal, or they're completely segregated from vehicles moving at more dangerous speeds. And the other side of this is speed management for a safe system. We focus on packaging this as speed management rather than lowering speeds, because lowering speeds is something that cities often find very difficult to talk about. There's a large amount of concern that that's going to lower efficiency or cause more congestion in a city. And even though the evidence suggests otherwise, we find it's just more productive to open a discussion about speed management rather than necessarily lowering speeds. So these are actually this is guidance that comes from Sweden as part of their Vision Zero program, basically managing speeds, assessing roads to ensure that the speeds are appropriate both for the type of road use, the type of users that are on the road, and the possible collisions that might be taking place there. So we've already been seeing changes around the world in the cities that we're working in. A very big part of our work is taking these concepts of the principles and opportunities for application of the SAFE system and really working with cities to identify how they can adapt those to their local context and their greatest need, and not taking a cookie cutter approach, because the situations are so different around the world. So you can see here we work with a variety of different direct interventions, everything from bike share and dedicated bike lanes through to management of speed through speed limits and things as simple as reducing lane widths, through to a variety of different design interventions to improve pedestrian safety. And this is just one example. We've also seen some examples similar to this in other presentations this morning. This is in São Paulo, Brazil, where you can see the intersection redesign has included popping out the corners of the intersection to improve visibility for pedestrians and reduce their crossing distance. And we're seeing, as cities are applying these different types of interventions and becoming excited about the impacts, that cities are becoming more and more interested in how they can really manage a safe system approach and integrate it into their mobility approach. So as part of our vision for the future, we're very excited to see that the first cities in low and middle income countries are now applying Vision Zero as a result of the support of us and other partners. So you're probably familiar with some of the logos in the top half of this image here, from the US, from Europe, different Vision Zero policies that have been introduced, but the bottom three there have been introduced in the past year. It's Vision Zero in Bogota, Colombia, Mexico City, and the Indian state of Vision Zero of Haryana. So we're already seeing some exciting impacts in these locations, in particular in Mexico City in the first year of implementing a safe system approach, which focused very heavily on regulating for speed. They reduced their cyclist fatalities by over 50% and their pedestrian fatalities by over 20%. So we're hoping that both with these impacts that we're seeing around the world and also the ones that cities are experiencing directly for themselves, we're going to see a rapid uptake of the safe system or Vision Zero approach in many of the cities that we're working in. We're already expecting cities in Brazil and more Indian states to be adopting these policies in the following year. Just a quick pivot to another area that we work in. WRI is part of a consortium of NGOs that's currently working, led by Robin Chase, the founder of Zipcar, to identify shared mobility principles for livable cities. This is very much in response to all the exciting new technology that's coming about, including automated cars, but also rideshare technology, the new dockless bike system phenomenon that is taking off around the world. So the idea of this group is that basically cities have great opportunities to harness these technologies and support and regulate their implementation in ways that ensure that the benefits are shared amongst the entire city. So I'm not going to read through all the principles. I just wanted to highlight the first few there that relate very directly to our integration of road safety and mobility that I've been talking about today. Those are planning our cities and their mobility together, prioritizing people over vehicles, and supporting shared and efficient use of vehicles, lanes, curbs, and land. And then I just wanted to skip forward as well to point 9 there, aim for public benefits via open data. And this relates very much to what Nadia presented today. But we see tremendous opportunities for data to inform our road safety activities going forward around the world. We're already piloting programs using speed measurements coming from ride-hailing apps in Bogota to identify areas for intervention and then to measure the impacts in real time. And we're also seeing great opportunities with dockless bike share programs to use the information about bike trips in cities to target dedicated infrastructure for cycling and then measure the response. So finally, just a quick plug for our upcoming publication. This will be launched in January, so in just a couple of weeks. And this presents a framework for cities and governments around the world to take the safe and sustainable mobility concepts based on the SAFE system and use those and apply them to their local context to develop an action plan for their own cities. So please look out for that coming up in January. Thank you.
Hey, good morning. I'm Chris Totaro. I'm the operations manager for Lyft for the Mid-Atlantic region. I've been with the company for a little over 2 years now, so it's been a pretty interesting ride over the last 2 years, but really excited this morning to tell you about what we see as the road ahead. Start off with a quote from Jane Jacobs: designing a dream city is easy, rebuilding a living one takes imagination. And at Lyft, we think that we are at a unique inflection point where we have an opportunity now where we can really redesign cities around people and not cars. So, nice picture to start us off with a big parking lot. Currently, we design our cities around cars, and with cars, with all the externalities that come with it. 2011, researchers estimated that we had 700 million parking spaces in the United States, which takes up roughly 6,000 square miles, which is roughly the size of the state of Connecticut. So right now, and it's not just parking spaces, it's narrow streets, it's parking garages, it's decks. Our cities are kind of, just designed right now around vehicles. So we have these huge things that we don't use very often, 4% of the time. Some other stats behind that: 76% of people report that they drive to work alone. 80% of people, or at any given time, 80% of seats are unoccupied in vehicles. To give you more context on that, we have about 250 million cars in the United States, so at a 4% utilization rate. At any given time, 240 out of those 250 million cars are parked. So we have these things that we design our cities around that we never really use, and then when we do use them, it kind of looks like this most of the time, right? Where we're sitting in traffic. A recent Transportation Institute study said that in 1982, the average American spent 16 hours per year sitting in traffic. In 2010, that number had jumped to 38 hours per year. Us lucky ones in DC, in 2010, that number was 82 hours per year. And in Los Angeles, who's just slightly worse than we are, a 26-mile stretch from the San Fernando Valley to downtown Los Angeles takes roughly 91 minutes at about 17.5 miles per hour. So not a great picture to paint on the transportation side right now. But what we're excited about is we really don't think that it has to last that way for too much longer. We're excited about what we call the third transportation revolution. And before we go into the third one, probably pretty good to talk about the first two. So at first in the country, we had very sporadic agriculture communities. Transportation was not efficient or non-existent or not safe. With the invention of railroads and canals, we were able to move freight and people across countries. New cities like Baltimore, Chicago, Los Angeles popped up. And then about a century later, you have the invention of the automobile that we all know and love. And with the invention of the automobile, we have suburbia, where now people could move away from the cities into the white picket fence with a dog in the yard and the house. And with that, we built massive highways, which cut our communities oftentimes in half. There's plenty of statistics out there that show the socioeconomic impacts of cutting these communities in half. One side of the highway thrived, the other side did not thrive, and it's kind of just created a less than productive environment for our communities. But as Nadia touched on, we're excited about what we think is the next transportation revolution, which is autonomous vehicle fleets. And our big bet is that by 2025, private car ownership will all but end in major US cities, and that within 5 years, a fully autonomous fleet of cars will provide the majority of Lyft rides across the country. Currently, Lyft provides rides in all 50 states. The majority of those rides come from, as you can imagine, heavy urban centers downtown. And so we don't see that trend changing in the next 5 years. We just see that shifting from human drivers to autonomous cars. But as I'll show, there will still be plenty of room for our drivers, which are currently the lifeblood of our company. How's it going to work? So currently, one car costs the average U.S. household about $9,000 per year. You figure car payments, insurance, maintenance, paying for parking, come down here, pay $25 to try to find a parking space, registration, fuel, all that stuff, right? So what we think it's going to transition into is what we look at as transportation as a service, where you're going to be buying mileage subscription plans. All right, so right now we have human drivers, right? And we all know that at Lyft, our drivers are, like I said, the lifeblood of our company. But safety, as we talked about, as everyone else has touched on today, humans are imperfect, right? As we move from human to autonomous plus human, you think about it as the major urban centers will be able to do fully autonomous, but we're still going to have a need for human drivers. So over the next 5 to 10 years, we think that we're going to have humans and autonomous drivers providing transportation for people on our platform. And then in the future, 10 years, 20 years down the road, all of the rides will be transitioned to autonomous vehicles. All right, so another way to look at this, the y-axis on the right is ridership. So as we introduce autonomous vehicles, rides will become cheaper, which means people will use the platform more, which means if you can use a platform and not have to take your car, the need for car ownership will decrease. But there is going to be that area in between where we're going to have a mix, like I said, of rideshare and autonomous drivers. Because at first, the first autonomous vehicles are going to be on fixed routes, certain weather conditions, low speeds, only in major urban centers with predetermined roads. And so there will still be a need so that we can provide transportation to everyone for human rideshare drivers until the technology catches up to the vision. One of the ways that you could take a self-driving car is first and last mile. So take a self-driving car, to and from major transit centers. We're already doing this across the country. This is an example in Denver, partnered with the city of Centennial. Where if you take a line ride, a line is when you pay a little less, but you share the car within this area between a certain time frame, the ride is cheaper. Here's another way that we kind of look at how this autonomous vision is going to roll out. So you think of wireless, think of your cell phone, right? Everyone didn't go from 3G to 4G right away. They started rolling out 4G in major urban centers where they had a center of gravity, the infrastructure in place, but everyone was still able to be covered because you had 3G, 2G, 1X, what have you. So this is kind of the way we see it as well as we roll out these autonomous vehicles, is we will have a combination of autonomous plus human drivers so that we can ensure that everyone can get to where they want to go safely and efficiently. Which is really what the company's mission is all about. We really want to, our mission at the company is to provide the world's best transportation and to redesign, like I said, cities around people and not parking. we're already doing that, and cities are already doing that across the country. You have the High Line in the Chelsea District in New York. In San Francisco, they took away Central Freeway. They added a park here on Octavia Street. In Los Angeles, we recently announced a partnership with the city where we're going to be reducing the number of lanes on Wilshire Boulevard and creating bike share, creating parks, creating walking, to try to retake back our cities, our curb space, our parking decks, and transform them into the cities that people want to live, where we can help make our communities safer and more connected and more efficient. So, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to join you today. I'm Brooks Rainwater, and I oversee the Center for City Solutions at the National League of Cities. Let me see if I can get this. There we go. So the Center for City Solutions at the National League of Cities is our research, technical assistance, community engagement, and leadership education component of the organization, where we work to make sure that we can help city leaders lead. So our members are the mayors, council members, and city staff throughout the country. We have 1,900 direct members, and together with our state municipal league partners, we represent 90% of all cities and towns throughout the country. And we're the oldest and largest organization advocating on behalf of cities. And so I'm glad to be here to talk about the future of cities and mobility and how we can all work together on the road to zero. You know, I'm particularly excited to be speaking with all of you at a moment when technology is infusing everything that we do in cities. You know, we launched our City of the Future initiative back in 2015 because what we were seeing was that there was a lot of disruption happening in the city space. Our friends here from Uber and Lyft were coming into cities and transforming the way that we got around. And so we started to work more with the private sector, bring together folks from the academic community, and really think about how can we get ahead of these things rather than cities just being reactive. And so when we launched the City of the Future initiative, we were focused on 5 core areas. We were focused on climate, technology, demographics, culture, and economics. And what we wanted to do was build out research pieces each year that would focus in on kind of these core issues with the idea that technology would be one of the kind of critical things that infuses all of it. So first we looked at technology and mobility, understanding that this kind of shift from regular self-driven vehicles to autonomous vehicles was happening, and that city leaders were really starting to see this and think that we needed to do something about it. So we looked at long-range transportation plans, and back in 2015 we found in the largest cities only 6% were actually really thinking about autonomous vehicles and how they might impact their cities. We pivoted from that to focus in on the future of work and thinking about, you know, autonomy and AI. All of these things had been starting to impact work. You know, we could see this in the factory space, manufacturing, but it's starting to kind of infuse more broadly. And we wanted to help city leaders think about what would this look like in different types of cities. And then finally, our latest report was on the future of equity, where we followed up some of our mobility work as well as started to think about economic development and public safety and, you know, forecasting out 10 to 20 years. What would these programs starting to look at inclusion and equitable development start to look like? We also followed up and looked at those long-range transportation plans, and it was really exciting to see within 2 years, 6% of large cities back in 2015, 38% of large cities now are looking at autonomous vehicles, because we've really moved beyond the point that these things are science fiction, you know, to science fact. And so that's where we are. And I think what we're finding is that city leaders hunger for this data, and they really want to understand what's going to be happening next. And so to begin, you know, looking at the future of transportation, we need to kind of go backwards. And I'd go a little deeper in this, but I think Chris's slides were actually quite helpful, talking about where we've come from when we were an agrarian society, you know, people walking around, utilizing horses, all the way to now where we're talking about autonomous vehicles and the Hyperloop. You know, it's been a long kind of period with not a lot of mobility innovation. It's exciting to see just in these last couple decades where we're going next. You know, I think that when we think about the future of mobility, we need to take a little closer look at what's been happening with mobility in cities. As you all know, mobility is central to individual prosperity, commerce, and the growth of communities. And the ultimate goal of cities is to really think about how we can create a level of seamlessness as we go from mode to mode. You know, I think this is the one thing that all of us that live in the DC area or anywhere else know, that it would be so exciting to be able to tell someone that I'll actually be there in a half an hour. But you just can't do that right now. Whether we take an Uber or Lyft, or whether I took the Metro this morning and was stopped for about 10 minutes, you just don't have that ability to truly understand how long it takes to get from place to place. But I'm pretty confident within the next 10 years we'll start to have that. And that's super exciting, I think, for anybody that needs to get somewhere. And so digging into a little bit of the data in our latest research report, as I mentioned, 38% of all long-range plans of the top 50 cities now mention driverless cars and what they're doing to plan for those kind of shifts. 82% lay out explicit intentions or strategy around intelligent transportation systems. Surprisingly, only 30% of these plans address the impact of transportation network companies, even though they operate in every single one of those 50 largest cities. And then what we were really excited to see was that 80% call out equity as a core concern when they're thinking about how it is they're building out long-range transportation. And so as we pivot from that to think about what cities are focused on, you know, in the short term versus the long term, 3 key areas really came up. Accessibility and multimodalism being number one, that citizens are more willing than ever to make investments in new and improved transit systems. In 2016, we saw where citizens actually put their money where their mouth is, where we had 77 local measures on the ballot that proposed voters paying taxes, fees, or other funding or financing mechanisms to pay for transit or transportation-related projects. And by 2020, we think that expansion and improvement of transit systems will help more people get to the places they live, work, and play. We also think there's going to be a growth in public and private mobility partnerships. In other research that we did specifically on the sharing economy, we found that 16% of cities right now have entered into some type of partnership with sharing economy companies, largely with Uber and Lyft. And the other 79% of the remaining cities would like to enter into those type of partnerships. And so what we're really starting to see is that first mile, last mile problem being solved in some communities, and it has to do with this kind of integration of private companies into the public sector a little bit more. And so we expect to see this continue. And we also think that within the next few years, we'll see autonomous vehicles in all 50 states. Currently, 20 states have state legislation on the books. We have about, I think, 12 US cities with pilot projects already and 12 about to launch. And so we think these numbers will only grow in the next few years. And then looking a little further out into 2030, the first area that we think we'll see a lot of changes are in the demographic and workforce shifts. You know, younger people in the workforce are showing an increasing preference for walkable urbanism. You know, we've seen this as more people have moved back into cities. We've seen it as people move into high-density downtowns and suburban areas, that this is going to continue to shift the way that we get around in our communities. And cities and employers will recognize that locating jobs in areas that are accessible to transit and other mobility options is good for the economy as a whole. We also think we'll see the growth of public and private mobility options increase. You know, whether it be light rail, buses, bikes, or something yet to come, we think this increase in mobility options offered by private and public entities. And cities and private sector will work together more and more, kind of pivoting off of what we've seen just in the last few years, particularly once autonomous vehicles come online, because that's going to open up so many new opportunities. And we think that we're going to see more and more autonomous vehicles and autonomous buses commonplace. I really liked seeing the slide that by 2025, the majority of Lyft rides will be autonomous. You know, I think this is one of those areas where once we actually see the uptake happen, it's just going to happen very, very fast, because people, particularly in cities, are going to see the opportunities that autonomous vehicles present. You know, I had the chance to ride in an autonomous Uber in Pittsburgh, and it was exciting. You know, it was great to be able to get around the city in a whole new way. You still had the 2 people up front making sure everything worked correctly, but it just felt like a normal ride. As we were driving around, a few people got scared, so I think we have opportunities to educate the public on what this is going to be like. But ultimately, you know, I think that we're in a time where mobility is shifting so rapidly, and it's all of you in the crowd, and it's all the policy people that need to make sure we're educating the public on the safety opportunities and really just what this future will look like. So I'm excited to have a broader conversation on this, and thank you all very much.
Great. Thanks to everybody on the panel. It was a great discussion. Just have a few moments for some Q&A, and I welcome folks to go to the microphone if you've got questions from the audience, too. So today, one of the reasons we're here, and the next thing we're doing is to have breakout sessions to talk about this Road to Zero Coalition scenario report that we're issuing of what the world will look like in 2050 that has zero fatalities on our roadways. And I think just thinking about the cities of tomorrow that we've discussed here, you have with that sort of your front line for feedback. And people are not afraid to go to their mayors and city council people, county council people, and tell them what they think, especially when it comes to their mobility. So I think one of the important aspects, a few of you touched on, is around consumer education. So how do cities, how do we, thinking about changes that are coming that may be different, uncomfortable for folks, how do we bring people along? And especially for those who are the leaders in communities, and those are their constituents. And so how can they bring people along? How can we as safety advocates bring folks along?
I mean, I think storytelling is key. I think that whether you're in the private sector or the public sector, you need to uplift the stories that talk about the safety aspects in particular, and just talk about the costs too. I mean, we saw it in the slides from our partners here on the stage that the costs are going to be driven down so much that you won't need to own an individual car anymore. And when you can see the traffic fatality deaths go down to, 1 to 2% of what we might see now, I think that the transition to get there is where it's going to be a challenge, because every time an autonomous vehicle, somebody dies in an autonomous vehicle, it's going to be front page news. So I think we need to also prepare for what the response is to that. But ultimately, again, as these mobility shifts are happening, it's thinking about what the future is that we all want to build together. It's one that's more people-centered, and it's one where automobiles don't drive our planning decisions anymore. And instead, we can really think about how we can build cities again for people.
I completely agree, and I would also add something that actually was touched upon in the previous panel, which is the value of pilot projects and being able to demonstrate to people and have that really immersive experience in what it's actually like to be using an intersection that is more safely designed, or to be driving on a road that has a lower speed limit but is actually easing congestion rather than increasing it the way people fear. And that's where what I mentioned before about the opportunity with the incredible amount of data that's available now also comes into play. This is the opportunity both to immerse people in the experience of a new type of design or speed limit approach, and then also have real-time data that can generate information about the direct impacts on traffic flow and speeds.
And just to sort of add on to that, I definitely agree with the two things that were mentioned before, but I would say engaging with stakeholders and different types of communities that are going to be impacted by the technology. Like Brooks, in your presentation, you mentioned the fact that equity was a piece that was included in lots of the plans. So making sure that we're reaching to all the communities inside of cities to understand what their perspectives are and what hurdles may be to adoption there, to make sure we're putting plans in place that address those unique needs of various types of populations in the city. If we want to move people away from car ownership, we need to make that clear case and tell the story properly. And then maybe put some other things in place to address what their hurdles may be or what their concerns may be as we talk about how the future of cities are going to develop.
I think public-private partnerships are really important to show people what the world could be like if transportation was different. We recently did a pilot, it's still ongoing, with the Golden Triangle bid in Washington, D.C., where Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, we worked with the Golden Triangle and DDOT to remove parking and make pickup drop-off lanes, not only for Lyft, but for Uber, for taxis, to make a more efficient pickup and drop-off experience. And so I think the natural progression on those public-private partnerships, or what does this look like if now the car is autonomous? It's maybe really not that different different than what you're currently going through. So showing people and not just telling them what it would look like, and then as Nadia said, really engaging with stakeholders, community leaders. We try to be heavily involved with different council members from different wards, talking about what their issues are and how we can help. And so I think the public-private partnerships will be really important moving forward.
Right, Jana Price.
Hi, Jana Price, National Transportation Safety Board. Nadia, it was really interesting hearing in your presentation about the data sharing that Uber is doing. I was wondering for both you and Chris, what kinds of safety-related data are you collecting from your drivers, your customers, and your vehicles that could be mined by people in the safety community?
I think it's a really good question. So we collect the information currently from the smartphone using like telematics. So we're able to leverage what we're detecting there in order to provide safety messaging there. About a little over a year ago, we put a feature in there that can detect whether we thought the phone was mounted. So if we were detecting motion using the gyroscopes and things that are currently in the phone, we could surface a message after the ride is ended, reminding them of the importance of not holding the phone in their hand and that it's safer if it's mounted. We don't have information from the OBD2 port, which would be the best in order to determine performance and safety indicators that way, but we're still trying to experiment and see what we can actually get a good reading from using the smartphone. We've done the same with safe speeding, so reminding people of their speed limits in certain situations and trying to figure out how to iterate and build. The end goal would be to put something together very similar to Movement, where we're able to pick up on indicators and things that cities and planners, let us know that's valuable and being able to have it publicly shared. The challenge there is making sure that it's done in a manner that protects the individual privacy of both the person who's driving and the person who's riding, and have it aggregated in a sense that it not only helps the city be able to design and make good cases, but also we think can have a real impact on some road safety indicators and key risk factors that we all know.
Yeah, I actually really don't have a lot to add to that. We're doing a lot of the same things, and I was going to add that the personal information safety and stewardship of data safety is very important to us at Lyft, and so we do collect a lot of data on speed, trips. We try to, like, when we're looking at these private-public partnerships, we're looking at when our area is most congested. Can we kind of determine if we have people start and end trips at different times, will that reduce congestion? Will that cause people to drive at different times? And so again, I don't have a lot to add to Nadia, but we are working actively with a lot of these private transportation safety boards.
The one point I would make is that Movement is a great start, and I'm excited to see that there are data sharing opportunities finally happening. But I do think that kind of data is the key piece that city leaders would like more of. So I think that the more opportunity there is to share, with the private sector and the public sector on that particular point would just be really, really welcomed.
Several of you mentioned how ride-sharing applications and automated vehicle technologies can solve the first and last mile problem, can extend access to public transit, and thereby reduce congestion. But there's been a lot of concern lately over some trends that are emerging in certain cities where ride-sharing applications are actually pulling users away from public transportation and exacerbating congestion on the roads. I was wondering if you could comment on how cities and ride-sharing companies can collaborate to ensure that this provides a mobility option that complements and supports public transit and thereby eases congestion.
No, I definitely think there's a lot to be done there. I know we work with a lot of public transportation organizations to either understand what is happening and if there's a way that we can support. I think it's an interesting consumer choice experiment that's kind of happening. And so then figuring out ways if we can bolster, because I agree, we want to be a complement to public transportation. And we've seen anecdotally that by doing that first and last mile, we've extended reach into different areas. So that's definitely a value add for everyone. We think that things like pool are an option for some people, but for other people, public transportation will be best. It's more affordable and it's efficient. But I think the solution to that is continuing to keep lines of communication open and figure out where it is. I know that based on where we are and where we're working, we've made different types of partnerships and different types of arrangements based on the local public transportation infrastructure. So unfortunately, there's not like a one-size-fits-all option to it, but we're definitely open to speaking individually and figuring out if there's a way that we can kind of work together, because we do see that as being the most efficient use of ride sharing and of the resources. We have public transportation systems already built out, so we definitely want to make sure they're also being utilized and then figuring out where we can plug and play to bolster
To Lyft, we have a program called Friends of Public Transit. So we have a whole website and a policy team whose job is to figure out how do we work more closely with public transit. I would say that a lot of it is consumer choice. We see a big boost in rides if the metro is not working, or if there's inclement weather and people don't want to walk to the metro station. So that's where I think we can be really helpful, is if it's raining out or if it's cold out, can we get people to these public transportation centers as opposed to everyone just taking individual cars? So that's something that our transit team, our Friends of Transit program, works pretty heavily on. But I think this is still a relatively new industry, so we're definitely open to talking about different solutions that people have, and it's still very much a learning process for us as well.
The only point I would make is I think what's happening is because we have not had large-scale infrastructure investment for so many years, a lot of our transit systems have challenges. And so I would say that what we need to do is actually spend more to make transit better, because leveling that playing field, so it's not just the private sector coming in and kind of taking opportunities when transit systems are having challenges, but doing what they're doing on the other side, which is working more closely with them. But I do hope to see in the next year more infrastructure investment conversations happening at the national level. And as I mentioned in my presentation, cities are definitely investing in this. So that's ultimately what we need to be doing.
I would just echo Brooks' comment there. With the cities that we're working with around the world, we're certainly seeing challenges and information seeking around how ride-hailing apps are affecting public transport. And another big issue that we're seeing is a very rapid growth in motorcycle use in order to kind of compensate for a lack of public transport opportunities. It's one of the cheapest ways for people to travel, but unfortunately almost one of the most dangerous. In fact, it's many, many times more dangerous for motorcycle users than for other road users. And so certainly for cities to invest very heavily in improving their public transport so it is a viable option for people and a preferable option, and also in terms of the last mile, really investing in that safety for pedestrians and cyclists connecting to transport.
Well, thank you all for being here today. That's all we have time for, but it's really been a great discussion, and I know that I've learned a lot about what mobility will look like especially in the cities of the future. And just one more round of applause for our panel, please. Thank you. Great. And I would like to turn things over to Maureen Vogel from National Safety Council Communications to take us into the next section of the day.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you to the panelists. This has been incredibly interesting this morning, so thank you all for being here, and to everybody in this room for all that you do to keep people safer on the roads. It does not go unnoticed, and it's incredibly important, so thank you. As Jane mentioned, I work in the communications department at the National Safety Council, and I oversee a lot of the media efforts at the council. So one of the things that we realized the Road to Zero Coalition needs is some kind of communications toolkit, something for both new members to use to publicize their involvement and to have the right messaging and all of that kind of thing, and for organizations who already belong to Road to Zero to more effectively communicate that if they so choose. So, along with a few of my colleagues, our communications department put together the following toolkit, and I will be happy to answer any questions about it as well. So the benefits, kind of like I mentioned, it really allows the members of the Road to Zero Coalition to share their goals and their messages in a similar voice with a similar tone. They're prepackaged resources, and they help, ease and hasten your communications should you want to do any. And it just gives the entire initiative that cohesive messaging. So the document, which is available on our website, and they're going to pull it up for us momentarily, it really includes everything that you need to know to publicize your new membership, your work with the Road to Zero stakeholders. It reminds you who all those stakeholders are as well, so that you have a little cheat sheet. Pre-approved quotes for press releases. If you'd like to include a quote from Debbie Hersman in anything that you publish, there's some things there for you to use. There's sample social media posts, and then official guidelines for the use of the Road to Zero logo, should you want to use that. So at nsc.org/road to zero, you can download each of the materials or the full kit. And if you can scroll down just a little bit, please. Thank you so much. You'll see you can download the kit in its entirety, but you can also download just specific sections if the entire thing is not necessarily pertinent to you. So if you could maybe pull up the distribute a press release for a second. Thanks. So this is really a plug and play kind of press release where you can put all of your own information in there. It really is for kind of new members to publicize that they joined the coalition, what the coalition is, what its goals are, and then you can also add some information about your own organization and what your personal mission is. If you can pull up the Road to Zero key messages, please. We'll do social media, that's fine too. The key messages. So we kind of came up with some things that people really need to know about the Road to Zero, what its overall goal is, and why it was started. So, the first one, you absolutely do not need to use these, but we feel like they're a little bit easy when you're trying to communicate what we're all about. Very basic. Our cars are safer than ever, but drivers are still not making very good decisions. The Road to Zero Coalition is focused on eliminating all roadway deaths by 2050. Very simple things, but things that are helpful to have on hand. And then if you can go to the social media posts as well. Thank you. So all of this stuff is just pre-written. You can plug it right into any of your social media channels, and you can use the Road to Zero logo as well if you'd like. There's also a place on the website to download that. And then our hashtags, the Road to Zero's hashtags, are there as well for quick reference. And then I was going to go back to the slides and switch them real quick. Thank you. So a couple next steps. We really want this to be a living document, not something that's just done now. So when the report is released in 2018, we will add to this list a standard press release for you to use as well if you want to. And just like the one that's already on the site, you'll be able to plug in any information that you want, and you can add your own thoughts about the report as well and how it relates to your particular mission. And then we'd like to do safety observance calendars based on everything that the Road to Zero Steering Committee focuses on each year. So from the National Safety Council's perspective, April's Distracted Driving Awareness Month. That's a big month for us. June is National Safety Month, which is another huge observance. And then I know NHTSA puts a beautiful calendar on its website too that helps everybody keep track of when we observe certain things. So we'd like to make something like that available for you as well. And tomorrow we're actually going to start working on putting that together. And so that's all that I have. Our PR team is happy to answer any questions that you might have. We know some organizations here are very large with your own communications departments and people who work on this every day, and other organizations might be much smaller and don't necessarily work with the media all the time or know exactly how to go about getting something like this started. We're happy to answer any questions that you might have. So. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you all find this very useful. And again, it's available at nsc.org/road to zero. So, thank you. Actually, there was one more thing. I know Susan wants you guys to go into your breakout sessions. So, you should have a number on your name badge for what particular group you're in. Group 1 is going to go right in front of these windows here. Group 2 right behind them, so kind of where the gentleman with the camera is right now. Group 3 by the back of the windows. Group 4 is in the front by this video wall here. Group 5 behind them, and then Group 6 along the back wall, sort of where you checked in that area. We're going to talk a little bit about the rollout for the report, and we would really love your feedback on any kind of communications that you think are necessary in order to publicize this as widely as possible and have as many people buy into it as possible. So I'll be coming around too and just jotting down some notes. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of great ideas from this group. So thank you. I think we'll break into those groups now.